They say the best revenge is a life well lived, but sometimes revenge is serving your ex-husband his bankruptcy papers while wearing $1 million smile. When Daniel threw his pregnant wife Sarah out onto the cold streets of Chicago to move in his younger mistress, he thought he'd won. He thought she was finished. He was wrong. He didn't just break her heart. He pushed her straight into the arms of the one man who could destroy him, his deadliest business rival. This isn't just a breakup story. This is a masterclass in karma. Watch until the end, you won't believe the final twist. The vibration of the crystal champagne flute against Sarah's fingernails was the only thing grounding her. They were sitting at Le Bernardin, Daniel's favorite spot in the city. It was a Tuesday, which was unusual. Daniel usually reserved Tuesdays for his late-night strategy meetings with the partners at Halloway & Croft, the private equity firm he had built from the ground up, or rather the firm Sarah had helped him build by sacrificing her own career in corporate law to manage his life, his image, and his home. She touched her stomach beneath the heavy velvet of the tablecloth. 14 weeks. She was going to tell him tonight. The sonogram picture was burning a hole in her clutch purse, tucked right next to the receipt for the vintage Rolex she had bought him to celebrate his recent acquisition of the Vanguard Tech merger. "You're quiet," Daniel said. He didn't look up from his phone. The blue light illuminated a face that had grown harder, colder over the last year. His jawline was sharp, his eyes distracted. "I have news," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. She forced a smile. "Good news, Daniel." Daniel finally placed the phone down, face up. A message flashed, "Isabella, almost done." Sarah felt a prick of ice in her chest. Isabella. She knew the name. Isabella Ricci was the 23-year-old daughter of their biggest investor, Carlo Ricci. She was an intern at the firm. Sarah had seen her at the Christmas party, stood clinging to Daniel's arm, a little too tightly, laughing a little too loudly at his dry jokes. "I have news too," Daniel said, cutting her off. He signaled the waiter for the check, despite them not having ordered food yet. "And I don't think your news is going to matter much after you hear mine." Sarah's hand froze over her stomach. "What do you mean?" Daniel sighed, a sound of pure inconvenience. "I'm buying you out, Sarah. Buying me out of the house." She was confused. "Daniel, we're married. We're partners." "Of the marriage," he corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. He reached into his inner suit jacket pocket and slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. It wasn't a gift. It was a legal document. "My lawyers drafted this morning. It's a settlement offer. It's generous considering you haven't brought an income into the household in 3 years. The room seemed to tilt, the clinking of silverware around them, the low hum of expensive conversation, it all blurred into a deafening roar. "You're divorcing me," Sarah whispered. "Daniel, I'm pregnant." Silence. For a second, she expected his face to soften. She expected the shock to break through that icy facade. But Daniel just stared at her, and then slowly, a look of distaste curled his lip. "That," he said, pointing a manicured finger at her, "is exactly why I'm doing this now. I knew you'd try to trap me." "Trap you? We've been trying for 2 years." Sarah's voice rose, drawing the attention of the table next to them. "I was trying to keep you happy," Daniel hissed, leaning in. "But things have changed. Isabella and I. We have a future. A real future. Her father is handing me the keys to the Asian markets. You're just a liability, Sarah. You're approaching 35. You're tired, and frankly, you don't fit the brand I'm building anymore." He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. "The apartment is already listed. You have 48 hours to vacate. The locks will be changed on Friday. Take the settlement, Sarah. If you fight me, I'll bury you in legal fees until you're sleeping in a shelter." He threw a $100 bill on the table for the water they drank and walked away. Sarah sat there frozen. She watched him walk out of the restaurant, texting on his phone as he went. She looked down at the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She opened her clutch and touched the sonogram. She was alone. Pregnant, unemployed, and about to be homeless. But as the initial shock faded, something else took its place. A slow, burning ember of rage. He had forgotten one thing. Before she was his wife, Sarah Miller was the smartest paralegal in the city. She knew where the bodies were buried, and she knew exactly who hated Daniel Croft more than anyone else in the world. 3 days later, the rain in Chicago was unforgiving. Sarah stood on the curb outside the luxury condo building she had called home for 7 years. 2 suitcases sat beside her. They were wet. The doorman, a kind older man named Henry, who had always tipped his hat to her, looked at her with pity through the glass doors, but didn't open them. He had his orders. Mr. Croft said no entry. She had no access to their joint accounts. Daniel had frozen them, claiming suspicious activity, pending the divorce proceedings. It was a dirty tactic, illegal even, but it would take weeks for a judge to correct it. Weeks she didn't have. She checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city using the last of her emergency cash stash she kept in a hollowed-out book. The room smelled of stale smoke and pine cleaner. She sat on the edge of the sagging bed and opened her laptop. She wasn't going to cry. She had done enough crying in the last 48 hours. Now she needed a strategy. She typed a name into the search bar, Ethan Caldwell. Ethan Caldwell was a billionaire venture capitalist, the CEO of Caldwell Horizon. He was known as the Wolf of the Gold Coast. He was ruthless, brilliant, and notoriously private. But more importantly, 5 years ago, Daniel had screwed Ethan out of a patent deal that cost Caldwell Horizon nearly $50 million. Ethan had sworn publicly that he would see Daniel Croft ruined. Sarah looked at the screen. Ethan was hosting a charity gala tonight at the Art Institute. Tickets were $5,000 a plate. She had $40. But she didn't need a ticket. She needed 5 minutes. Sarah dug through her suitcase. She had managed to save one gown, a deep emerald silk dress that she had bought for a gala Daniel never took her to. It was elegant, timeless, and luckily it still fit her early pregnancy frame perfectly. She spent an hour doing her hair and makeup, channeling every ounce of armor she had left. She didn't look like a rejected wife. She looked like a queen in exile. Getting into the gala was easier than expected. She knew the catering company Elite Tastes. She used to hire them for Daniel's parties. She slipped through the service entrance, grabbed a tray of champagne flutes to blend in, and then ditched the tray behind a curtain near the ballroom. The room was glittering with old money. Chandeliers, diamonds, the smell of expensive perfume. And there, in the center of the room, was Ethan Caldwell. He was taller than Daniel Broader. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a sharp, black, bespoke suit with no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. He looked bored. He looked dangerous. Sarah took a breath, placed a hand on her stomach for courage, and walked straight toward him. Security stepped forward, but Ethan saw her. His eyes narrowed. He recognized her, not as Sarah, but as Daniel's wife. He waved the security off with a flick of his hand. "Mrs. Croft," Ethan said, his voice deep and gravelly. He didn't smile. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did Daniel send you to spy on me? Or perhaps he wants to offer me another fraudulent contract? I'm not Mrs. Croft anymore, Sarah said, her voice steady, despite her heart hammering against her ribs. And Daniel doesn't know I'm here. In fact, if he knew I was talking to you, he'd probably have a stroke. Ethan took a sip of his scotch, his interest piqued. Go on. Daniel served me divorce papers 3 days ago at Le Bernardin, she said bluntly. He's leaving me for Isabella Ricci to secure the Asian market deal with her father. He froze my accounts. He kicked me out. And... She hesitated, then lifted her chin. He left me while I'm carrying his child. Ethan's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He hated Daniel, but he despised dishonor. Why are you telling me this? Do you want money, Charity? I don't want your charity, Sarah said, stepping closer. I want a job. Ethan laughed, a short, dry sound. A job. My company eats people alive, Sarah. You're a housewife. I was a senior paralegal at Stratton and Oakmont before I managed Daniel's life, she corrected him sharply. I know how Daniel structures his deals. I know where he hides his offshore assets to avoid taxes. I know that the Vanguard merger he just celebrated is built on a shaky IP claim that you could dismantle in a week if you had the right paperwork. The room seemed to go quiet around them. Ethan set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray. He looked at her with new eyes. He saw the desperation, yes, but he also saw the steel. You have the paperwork? Ethan asked softly. I made copies of everything before I left the house. Sarah lied. She didn't have them yet, but she knew the passwords to get them. I can give you the Vanguard deal. I can give you Daniel on a silver platter. But I have conditions. Ethan crossed his arms. I'm listening. I need a place to live, secure, where he can't find me. I need medical care for the baby. And I need a position at Caldwell Horizon, not as a secretary, as a consultant. Ethan studied her for a long, agonizing minute. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward. You're asking for a lot for a woman who just broke into a gala. I'm asking for a fair price for the destruction of your greatest enemy, she countered. Ethan extended his hand. It was warm, large, and calloused. Deal. My driver is outside. We'll go to my office and discuss the details. And Sarah. Yes. If you're lying to me, Daniel will be the least of your worries. I'm not lying, she whispered, shaking his hand. I have nothing left to lose. As they walked out of the ballroom together, a photographer for the Chicago Tribune snapped a photo. The flash blinded them for a second. The next morning, that photo would be on every gossip blog in the city. The headline wouldn't be about the charity. It would read, "The King's rival takes the Queen." Daniel was going to see it, and the war was just beginning. The penthouse at the top of the St. Regis Chicago was a far cry from the cramped motel room Sarah had woken up in just 24 hours prior. It was sleek, modern, and terrifyingly quiet. Ethan had given her the keys to his guest suite, a sprawling apartment in its own right, and told her to rest. But sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. By 6:00 a.m., Sarah was awake. She wasn't wearing silk pajamas. She was wearing one of Ethan's oversized dress shirts she'd found in the laundry closet, because her own clothes were still damp from the rain. She sat at the marble kitchen island, her laptop open, cross-referencing files she had accessed from the cloud. When Ethan walked in at 6:30 a.m., fresh from a run. He stopped dead in his tracks. He was expecting a weeping woman. He found a war general. "You're up," he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. He was shirtless, sweat glistening on his chest. Sarah forced herself not to look. "I found the leak in the Vanguard deal," she said, not looking up from her screen. Daniel didn't just overlook the IP claim. He buried it. He paid off a junior developer at Vanguard, a guy named Thomas Klein, to sign a non-disclosure agreement that effectively silences his claim to the core algorithm. But the NDA is flimsy. It's based on Delaware law, but Klein lives in California. California labor codes void non-competes like this. Ethan walked over, leaning over her shoulder to look at the screen. He smelled of rain and expensive cedarwood soap. "If we expose this, the merger halts," Sarah finished. "The SEC investigates Holloway and Croft for due diligence negligence, and the Ricci family gets spooked." Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. "You're terrifying, Sarah." "I'm motivated," she corrected. By noon, the photo from the gala had gone viral. The Chicago Tribune, page 6, even Business Insider had picked it up. The headline on TMZ was brutal. "Billionaire swap Daniel Croft's wife moved in with rival Ethan Caldwell 24 hours after split." Daniel's reaction was swift and predictable. At 2:20 p.m., Sarah's phone, which she had finally turned back on, exploded with notifications. Daniel hadn't called her. He had called his publicist. A press release had been issued from Holloway and Croft. "Mr. Croft is deeply saddened by his wife's sudden departure. While he wishes to keep private matters private, he is concerned for her mental state. Mrs. Croft has a history of instability and has recently been struggling with substance abuse issues. We ask for privacy as we navigate this difficult time." "Substance abuse." Sarah read the statement aloud, her hands shaking. "I'm pregnant. I haven't touched a glass of wine in 3 months." Ethan was pacing the living room on the phone with his legal team. He hung up and turned to her. "He's trying to discredit you before you can leak the Vanguard info. If you speak out now, he'll paint you as a bitter, intoxicated ex-wife. No one will believe the evidence." "So what do I do?" Sarah felt the tears pricking her eyes. "Hide? No." Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "We don't hide. We elevate. Tonight is the grand opening of the Caldwell Foundation Pediatric Wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. You're coming with me." "Ethan, I can't. Everyone thinks I'm a drug addict now." Ethan walked over to her, crouching down, so he was eye level with her sitting form. He took her hands. "Let them think what they want. You are going to walk into that hospital looking like the picture of health and grace. You're going to be the director of the new charity initiative I'm announcing. We're going to legitimize you." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah whispered. "It's just business, right?" Ethan paused. His thumb brushed over her knuckle. "Daniel took my patent. But what he did to you, throwing away his own child, that's a sin I can't forgive. My father left my mother when she was pregnant with me. I know what it feels like to be the mistake left behind. I won't let that happen to your child." For the first time since the restaurant, Sarah felt a crack in the ice around her heart. 2 months passed. Sarah was now showing. Her bump was small but undeniable, hidden beneath tailored blazers and structured dresses provided by Ethan's personal stylist. She had officially joined Caldwell Horizon as a strategic consultant. The press had a field day, but Ethan's PR team was better than Daniel's. They spun the narrative. Sarah Croft, the brains behind her husband's success, finally steps into the light. But Daniel wasn't staying quiet. The Vanguard deal was shaking. Sarah's anonymous tip to the SEC had triggered an audit. Daniel was bleeding money, and when a narcissist bleeds, they attack. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah was in her office at Caldwell Horizon, reviewing potential acquisition targets in the biotech sector. Her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Miller." She had gone back to her maiden name. "There's a delivery for you. It's marked urgent." "Send it up." A courier walked in with a large, ornate gift basket. It was filled with white lilies, funeral flowers, and expensive baby products. Buried in the center was a silver rattle. There was a card. "To the little bastard. Hope he doesn't have his mother's lying gene. D." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. It wasn't just the cruelty. It was the threat. He knew. He was acknowledging the baby, but only to weaponize it. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. Sarah gasped, doubling over her desk. It wasn't just stress. It was a cramp, deep and terrifying. "Sarah." Ethan was in the doorway. He had been coming to ask her about a file, but the moment he saw her face, the file dropped to the floor. "Sarah." He was at her side in a second, catching her as her knees buckled. "The baby," she gasped, clutching his arm. "Something's wrong." The next hour was a blur of sirens and white lights. Ethan rode in the ambulance with her, holding her hand so tight she thought he might break it. He barked orders at the EMTs, terrified. At the hospital they ran tests. Stress-induced hypertension. The doctor was stern. "You need to minimize stress, Ms. Miller. The baby is fine for now, but your blood pressure is dangerously high. Another spike like this could cause a detachment." Sarah lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. She felt defeated. "I can't do this, Ethan. He's winning. He's in my head." Ethan sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to her bed. He looked exhausted. He hadn't left her side. "He sent the basket," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. He had seen it on her desk. "He called the baby a bastard," Sarah whispered. Ethan stood up. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He won't ever get near you again. I'm doubling security. And Sarah, yes, I'm not just going to ruin his business anymore. I'm going to take his legacy." "How?" "The Ricci family," Ethan said. "Carlo Ricci is old school. He values family above all else. He thinks Daniel left you because you were unstable and refused to have children. That's the lie Daniel told him to secure Isabella's hand." Sarah's eyes widened. "He told Ricci I didn't want kids." "Yes. And if Ricci finds out that Daniel abandoned a pregnant wife for his daughter, the deal isn't just dead. Daniel is dead in this town." "We need proof," Sarah said, sitting up slightly. "He'll deny the baby is his. He'll demand a paternity test, and he'll rig it." "Then we beat him to it," Ethan said. "Next week is the Ricci Gala. It's their family's biggest event. Daniel and Isabella will be there to announce their engagement. We're going to crash the party." "Ethan, I'm pregnant and on bed rest. I can't crash a party." Ethan smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle. "You won't be crashing it as my consultant, Sarah. You'll be crashing it as my fiancé." Sarah froze. "What?" "It's the only way to get you in without an invite. Plus," he looked away, a flush of red on his neck, "it will drive Daniel absolutely insane." The Ricci Gala was held at the Field Museum under the giant skeleton of Sue the T-Rex. It was fitting, Sarah thought, considering she was walking into a room full of dinosaurs and predators. She wore red, not just any red, a blood-red Valentino gown that draped over her bump, accentuating it rather than hiding it. She was 6 months along now. There was no hiding it. On her finger sat a 10-carat yellow diamond ring. It was a prop Ethan had assured her, pulled from his family vault. But it felt heavy. Real. When they walked in, the room didn't just go quiet. It gasped. Ethan Caldwell, the city's most eligible bachelor, walking arm in arm with his rival's pregnant ex-wife. Daniel and Isabella were near the stage. Isabella looked beautiful, young, and naive in white. Daniel looked like he had seen a ghost. They made their way through the crowd. Sarah kept her head high, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Ethan's arm was a steel band around her waist. "Ignore them," Ethan whispered in her ear. "Look at me. Smile." She looked up at him and smiled. For a moment, she forgot it was a performance. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. "Well, well," a voice boomed. "Carlo Ricci, the patriarch." He was a short, stout man with eyes like flint. He walked over, ignoring Daniel, who was trailing behind him like a puppy. "Mr. Caldwell, and Mrs. Croft." "Ms. Miller," Sarah corrected gently. "And actually, it's soon to be Mrs. Caldwell." The whisper ran through the crowd like wildfire. Daniel stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "She's lying," Daniel shouted, losing his composure. "She's a liar, Carlo. She's mentally unstable. I look pretty stable to me, Daniel," Sarah said, her voice calm. "And that child," Daniel sneered, pointing at her stomach. "It's not mine. God knows who she slept with. That's why I left her. Carlo, she was unfaithful." This was the moment, the trap. Ethan stepped forward, shielding Sarah. "Careful, Daniel. Slander is expensive." "It's not slander if it's true." Daniel turned to the crowd, desperate. "She got pregnant by some random guy, tried to pin it on me, and I kicked her out." "That's the truth." Sarah reached into her clutch. She didn't pull out a sonogram. She pulled out a small audio recorder. "I thought you might say that Daniel," Sarah said. She turned to Carlo Ricci. "Mr. Ricci, I have a recording here from the night Daniel fired me. Divorced me, at Le Bernardin. Would you like to hear the part where he admits he's leaving me specifically because he needs your Asian market connections? Or the part where he acknowledges the pregnancy is his, but calls it an inconvenience?" Daniel lunged. "Give me that!" Security intercepted him before he got within 3 feet of Sarah. Ethan didn't even flinch. Sarah handed the recorder to Carlo Ricci. "I think you should listen to this in private, Mr. Ricci. Before you let your daughter marry a man who treats family like a line item on a spreadsheet." Isabella was crying now, mascara running down her face. She looked at Daniel. "You told me she was barren. You told me she cheated." "She did," Daniel screamed. "It's a fake recording, AI. It's all fake." But the doubt was there. Carlo Ricci looked at the recorder, then at Daniel. The disgust on the older man's face was absolute. "Get him out of here," Carlo said to his security, gesturing to Daniel. "You can't do this." "We have a contract," Daniel yelled as he was dragged away, kicking and screaming like a child. Sarah let out a breath she felt she had been holding for months. Her knees went weak. Ethan caught her instantly. "You did it," he whispered into her hair. "We did it," she replied. But as the adrenaline faded, Sarah looked around the room. People were staring, not with pity but with awe. And something else. She looked at Ethan. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at her, and the look in his eyes terrified her more than Daniel ever had. It wasn't acting anymore. "Let's go home," Ethan said softly. "To our home." As they walked out, leaving the chaos behind, Sarah realized the real danger wasn't over. She had destroyed her ex-husband, but she was falling in love with a man she was only supposed to be using. And in their world, love was the most dangerous liability of all. But the night wasn't over. As they reached the limo, a process server stepped out of the shadows. "Sarah Miller. Yes, you've been served." Sarah took the papers. It wasn't from Daniel. It was from Child Protective Services. Anonymous tip regarding the endangerment of an unborn child due to maternal drug use. Daniel's final move. He hadn't just attacked her reputation. He had called the authorities. Ethan snatched the papers from her hand. His face went deadly calm. "He wants a war," Ethan said, crumpling the paper in his fist. "I'm going to burn his entire world to the ground." The weeks following the Ritchie Gala were a blur of legal summons and invasive scrutiny. Daniel's tip to Child Protective Services hadn't just been a nuisance. It was a calculated strike designed to break Sarah's spirit. He knew he couldn't win her back, and he knew his business reputation was hanging by a thread, so he chose the scorched earth policy. If he couldn't have a legacy, no one would. The penthouse at the St. Regis became a fortress. Ethan hired a former Secret Service agent to stand guard at the elevator. But he couldn't stop the social workers. Sarah sat on the plush velvet sofa, her hands trembling as she handed a urine sample cup to a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Higgins. "This is standard procedure, Ms. Miller," Mrs. Higgins said, labeling the jar. "Given the allegations of cocaine usage during the first trimester, I have never used drugs." Sarah said, her voice cracking. "My ex-husband is trying to hurt me. He's losing his company, and he's lashing out." "We investigate every claim regardless of the source," the woman said robotically. "We'll need to inspect the nursery next." Ethan stood by the window, his back tense. He was on the phone with the district attorney, calling in a favor he had saved for a decade. When he hung up, he looked like he wanted to punch a wall. "They're stalling," Ethan said after the social worker left. "Daniel's lawyers are filing motions to delay the DNA test until after the birth. He wants to keep the custody battle active so he can freeze your assets again. He's trying to starve you out." "He can't starve me out," Sarah said, placing a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked hard. "I have you." Ethan froze. The air in the room shifted. The fake engagement, the business arrangement, it had all dissolved into something terrifyingly real. He walked over and knelt before her, resting his forehead against her knees. "You will always have me," he swore. "I will spend every penny I have to bury him before I let him take this child." But the stress was taking its toll. That night, a storm broke over Chicago. Thunder rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah woke up at 3:00 a.m. with a pain that wasn't just a cramp. It was a vice grip around her spine. She tried to stand, and water gushed onto the hardwood floor. "Ethan!" she screamed. He was there in seconds, bursting through the guest room door, which he had left ajar for weeks. He didn't ask questions. He scooped her up in his arms, ignoring the water and blood staining his silk robe. "I've got you," he kept repeating as he ran for the elevator. "I've got you." The hospital scene. The labor was complications on top of complications. Preeclampsia. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The doctors were shouting codes Sarah didn't understand. "We have to do an emergency C-section. Dr. Aris muttered, snapping gloves on. Her pressure is stroking out. They wouldn't let Ethan in the OR initially. He nearly tore the doors off the hinges until the head nurse, terrified by the look in the billionaire's eyes, handed him scrubs. "Just hold her hand," the nurse whispered. "Keep her with us." Sarah was fading. The lights were too bright. She felt cold. "Ethan," she mumbled through the oxygen mask. If I don't you dare," Ethan growled, gripping her hand so hard his knuckles turned white, tears streaming down his face. "You don't get to leave me. Not now. We haven't even had our first date." A shrill cry cut through the chaos. It was a boy. Small, premature, but screaming with the lungs of a fighter. "He's here," Ethan sobbed, kissing Sarah's forehead. "He's here, Sarah. Look." But Sarah's eyes were closed. The monitors were beeping frantically. She was hemorrhaging. For 3 days, Sarah was in the ICU. Ethan didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He sat by her bed, holding the tiny baby boy against his chest, skin to skin, just like the nurses told him to. He named the boy Leo because he had the heart of a lion to survive the chaos of his conception. On the 4th day, Sarah woke up. And on the 5th day, a visitor arrived. It wasn't Daniel. It was Isabella Ricci. Isabella looked 10 years older than she had at the gala. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie. She looked over her shoulder as she entered the private hospital room. "I can't stay long," Isabella whispered. "Daniel thinks I'm at the gym." "Get out," Ethan said, his voice low. "Wait," Sarah rasped from the bed. "Let her speak." Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. She placed it on the bed table. "My father called off the wedding," Isabella said, her voice shaking. "But Daniel, he won't let go. He's blackmailed my dad. He has dirt on the Ricci family business tax evasion stuff from the 90s. He's forcing my dad to keep funding him." She looked at the baby in Ethan's arms and teared up. "I found this in Daniel's safe." Isabella pointed to the drive. "It's not just the Vanguard deal. It's everything. He's been laundering money for a cartel in Miami to cover his losses. That's why he was so desperate for the Asian market merger. He needed clean cash to pay them back." Isabella looked at Sarah. "He told me you were a monster. But I see who the monster is now. If you give this to the FBI, he goes away for life. And my father will go down too. But I don't care anymore. I just want to be free." Sarah looked at the young woman. She saw herself from a year ago, trapped, manipulated, scared. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Isabella nodded, pulled her hood up, and vanished. The showdown. 2 weeks later, the final custody hearing was scheduled. Daniel walked into the courtroom, looking smug. He had high-priced lawyers flanking him. He didn't know about the flash drive. He thought he was there to claim his son and force a settlement. "Your Honor," Daniel's lawyer began, "Mr. Croft demands immediate genetic testing and full custody. He believes the mother is unfit and living with a man who has a vendetta against him." The judge looked at Sarah's lawyer. "Counsel." Ethan stood up. He wasn't Sarah's lawyer, but he was allowed to speak as a witness. "Your Honor," Ethan said, buttoning his jacket, "we have no objection to a DNA test. In fact, we welcome it. However, custody might be difficult for Mr. Croft to manage from a federal penitentiary." Daniel laughed. "Excuse me." The doors to the back of the courtroom swung open. 4 federal agents in windbreakers walked in. "Daniel Croft," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering." Daniel stood up. his face draining of color. "What?" "This is a mistake. You can't do this here." "We have the logs, Daniel," Ethan said calmly from across the aisle. "We have the Miami transfers. It's over." As the agents handcuffed Daniel, he thrashed, looking wildly at Sarah. "Sarah. Sarah. Tell them I'm the father of your child. You need me." Sarah stood up slowly, leaning on Ethan for support. She looked at the man she had wasted 10 years on. "You're right, Daniel," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent courtroom. "You are the father, but you will never be his dad." They dragged him out, screaming. The immediate aftermath. The day Daniel Croft was dragged out of the federal courthouse in handcuffs marked the end of an era in Chicago's financial district. But for Sarah, it was the first breath of fresh air she had taken in nearly a year. The footage of his arrest was everywhere. It played on loop on the screens in Times Square. It was the lead story on CNN. The fall of the Titan, they called it. But for Sarah, watching from the safety of Ethan's penthouse, it didn't look like a Titan falling. It looked like a scared, small man finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of selfishness. The weeks that followed were a chaotic storm of asset seizures and legal proceedings. The government froze everything Daniel owned, the accounts, the cars, the house in the Hamptons, even the engagement ring he had bought for Isabella. Because the Ritchie family had turned state's witness to save their own skins, the case against Daniel was ironclad. He wasn't just facing fines. He was looking at 15 to 20 years for RICO violations. Sarah sat in the conference room of Caldwell Horizon, signing the final custody papers. With Daniel incarcerated and awaiting trial without bail, full legal and physical custody of baby Leo was granted to her by default. "It's done," her lawyer said, closing the thick binder. "He has no rights, no visitation. He is for all intents and purposes a stranger to your son." Sarah looked down at Leo, who was sleeping soundly in his carrier on the table. He was 3 months old now, his cheeks round and pink. He looked nothing like the man rotting in a cell. He looked like hope. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Ethan was waiting for her outside the office. He didn't ask how it went. He simply took the carrier in one hand and offered her his other arm. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Not yet," Sarah said, a newfound strength in her voice. "I want to go to the old apartment." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Driver, take us to the Lakeshore Drive condo." When they arrived, the building was taped off by federal agents seizing assets, but Sarah's name was still on the deed, and the seizure didn't apply to her personal effects. She walked into the home she had been thrown out of, the place where she had spent years building a life for a man who didn't love her. It felt cold, empty. It smelled of stale air and Daniel's expensive cologne, a scent that used to make her feel safe, but now just made her nauseous. She walked to the master bedroom. The closet was half empty. Daniel had taken his suits, but left her things. She found the box of photos from their wedding. She didn't cry. She simply dumped the box into the trash chute in the hallway. Then she walked to the safe in the wall. She knew the combination. Daniel was too arrogant to change it, assuming she'd never get back in. Inside, she found what she was looking for, her grandmother's pearl necklace. He had hidden it from her during the divorce, claiming it was lost. She clasped it around her neck. It felt cool and heavy, a reclaiming of her history. "Let's go," she said to Ethan, not looking back. "I never want to see this place again." The slow burn ignites. 6 months passed. Life fell into a rhythm. Sarah launched Miller & Associates, a boutique crisis management firm. Ironically, her own public scandal had made her the most sought-after consultant in the city. Everyone wanted the woman who had taken down Daniel Croft to fix their problems. She was independent. She was wealthy in her own right. She didn't need Ethan anymore. And that was exactly why their relationship terrified her. They were living together, raising Leo together, eating breakfast together every morning. But they slept in the separate rooms. The fake engagement had technically ended when the Ricci wedding was cancelled, but neither of them had issued a press release to break it off. They were existing in a beautiful, comfortable limbo. It came to a head on a snowy Tuesday in December. Sarah came home late from the office. The penthouse was quiet. She found Ethan in the nursery. The room was lit only by the soft glow of a nightlight. Ethan was sitting in the rocking chair, Leo asleep on his chest. Ethan was reading a business report, one hand absent-mindedly stroking the baby's back. Sarah stood in the doorway, her heart aching with a sudden, overwhelming realization. This is it, she thought. This is the life I always wanted. Ethan looked up. He smiled a tired, unguarded smile that he saved only for her. He was fussy, Ethan whispered. Teething, I think. I walked him for an hour. Sarah walked into the room, kicking off her heels. She knelt beside the chair. You didn't have to do that. You have a board meeting in Tokyo in the morning. You need sleep. I have everything I need right here, Ethan said softly. The silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Ethan. Sarah started, her voice trembling. We have to stop pretending. Ethan went still. His hand stopped moving on Leo's back. Stop pretending what? That this is a business arrangement. That you're just helping me out of pity. That we're roommates. Ethan carefully stood up and placed the sleeping Leo into his crib. He tucked the blanket around the boy with the precision of a surgeon. Then he turned to Sarah. I haven't been pretending for a long time, Sarah, he said, his voice low and rough. I haven't been pretending since the moment you walked up to me at that gala in the green dress. I was terrified you were only with me for revenge. I didn't want to push you. I'm not here for revenge anymore, Sarah said, stepping closer to him. I'm here because you're the only man who ever saw me. Not the wife, not the assistant, not the victim. Me. Ethan closed the distance between them. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. I don't just see you, Sarah. I breathe you. You and that boy. You're my entire world. If you leave, I have nothing. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. He kissed her then. It wasn't a show for the cameras. It wasn't a strategic move. It was slow, deep, and full of a promise that terrified and thrilled her. It was the kiss of a man claiming his home. The proposal, 2 years later. The Caldwell Foundation was hosting its annual summer gala, but this time it was on a private yacht cruising Lake Michigan. The city skyline glittered in the background, a testament to the empire Ethan and Sarah now ruled together. Sarah was wearing gold this time. She looked like a trophy, but everyone in the room knew she was the one who polished the gold. She was laughing with a senator when the music stopped. Ethan took the microphone on the small stage. I have a speech prepared, Ethan said, looking out at the crowd. Usually I talk about quarterly earnings or charity goals, but tonight I want to talk about ROI, return on investment. The crowd chuckled. 3 years ago, I made the best investment of my life. Ethan continued, his eyes locking onto Sarah's. I invested in a woman who had lost everything, and in return she gave me a family. She gave me a son, Leo, who is currently trying to steal shrimp from the buffet. Laughter rippled through the crowd as everyone looked at 3-year-old Leo, who was indeed holding a shrimp. "Sarah," Ethan said, stepping off the stage and walking through the parted crowd toward her. "You taught me that love isn't a transaction, it's a leap of faith." He stopped in front of her. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a simple folded piece of paper. "This," he said, handing it to her, "is the adoption paperwork for Leo. I signed it this morning. Regardless of what you say next, I am his father, legally and forever. No one can ever take him from us." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. This meant more than diamonds. This was safety. This was permanence. "But," Ethan smiled, dropping to one knee, "I would really like to be his father and your husband." He pulled a ring from his pocket. It wasn't the yellow diamond prop from the Ricci Gala. It was a vintage sapphire, dark and mysterious, surrounded by diamonds. "Sarah Miller, will you make me the luckiest man in Chicago?" "Yes," she choked out. "Yes, 1,000 times." The cheers from the boat could be heard from the shore. The ghost in the machine. While Sarah was planning her wedding, Daniel Croft was learning a new kind of routine. Otisville Federal Prison wasn't the worst prison in the country, but for a man like Daniel, it was hell. He wasn't physically abused. He was simply ignored. He was inmate 78402. He worked in the laundry detail. His hands, once manicured and soft, were chapped and raw from harsh detergents. He had no visitors. Isabella had moved to Italy and changed her name. His former business partners had all disavowed him. His parents, embarrassed by the shame he brought on the family name, had moved to Florida and stopped taking his collect calls. But the worst torture wasn't the isolation. It was the television in the common room. Every night, the other inmates watched the news, and every few months, he would see them. He saw Sarah on the cover of Forbes titled "The Phoenix of Finance." He saw Ethan and Sarah at the Met Gala. He saw paparazzi photos of them walking in the park with a dark-haired little boy who looked exactly like Daniel used to, but with a smile Daniel never had. The other inmates mocked him. "Hey, Croft, isn't that your wife? Looks like she upgraded, man." Daniel would sit there staring at the grainy screen, feeling a hollowness in his chest that no amount of screaming could fill. He had traded a diamond for a rock, and the rock had crushed him. He started writing letters. At first they were angry, then begging, then apologizing. He wrote hundreds of pages. He poured his soul out, claiming he had changed, claiming he loved her, claiming he wanted to know his son. He sent them all to the only address he remembered. The fire and the ash. It was Leo's 5th birthday. The party was winding down. The sun was setting over the vast lawn of the Caldwell estate in the Hamptons. Sarah sat by the fire pit, the warmth of the flames combating the cool ocean breeze. She was pregnant again, a little girl this time. She felt full, complete. Ethan walked over holding a thick envelope. "It's from him." Again. Sarah took the envelope. It was heavy. She could feel the desperation radiating off the paper. "The warden called my lawyer," Ethan said, sitting next to her. "He says Daniel is up for parole in 6 months. Good behavior. He's claiming he has a family to come home to. He's using these letters as proof that he's trying to reconnect." Sarah looked at the letter. If she opened it, if she engaged, she validated him. She gave him a tether to her life. She looked across the lawn. Leo was chasing fireflies with Ethan's golden retriever. He was laughing that pure, unburdened sound of a happy childhood. "Does Leo ask about his real dad?" Sarah asked quietly. "He asked me once where he came from," Ethan said. "I told him he came from a tummy, but he was made from love. He seemed satisfied with that." Sarah smiled. "He doesn't need to know Daniel. Not yet. Maybe when he's 18, if he asks, I'll tell him the truth. But I won't let Daniel's shadow touch his childhood." She held the envelope over the fire. "You're not going to read it?" Ethan asked. "I know what it says," Sarah replied. "It says I want. It says I need. It's the same thing he's always said. It's never about what I need or what Leo needs." She dropped the letter. The flames licked the corners, curling the cheap paper. The ink darkened, then turned to ash. The words of a desperate man floated up into the night sky as smoke disappearing into the vast, indifferent universe. "He's a ghost," Sarah said, dusting off her hands. "And we are alive." The final encounter. 6 months later. Sarah was in downtown Chicago for a final dress fitting for a charity ball. She was alone for once, having sent her security detail to get coffee. She stepped out of the boutique, checking her phone. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was raspy, broken. Sarah looked up. A man stood there. He was wearing a janitor's uniform from a local halfway house. He was thin, his hair thinning and grey. His skin was sallow. It took her a full 5 seconds to recognize him. Daniel. He had been released early on parole, but stripped of his licenses, his money, and his reputation. This was the only job he could get, sweeping the streets in front of the skyscrapers he used to own. He stared at her, his eyes wide. He took in the glow of her skin, the heavy diamond on her finger, the sheer power radiating from her stance. "Sarah," he croaked. He took a step forward, a flicker of the old arrogance trying to ignite. "Sarah, it's me. I wrote to you." Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She simply looked at him. In her mind, she replayed the moment at Le Bernardin. The cruelty, the eviction, the text to Isabella. "I didn't get any letters," Sarah lied smoothly. Her voice was cool, detached. I want to see my son," Daniel stammered. "I have rights." "You have nothing," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a judge's gavel. "You signed away your rights the day you threw his pregnant mother onto the street. You are a convicted felon. You are a stranger. If you come within 500 feet of Leo, I will bury you so deep in legal filings you won't see sunlight until the next century." Daniel flinched as if she had struck him. He looked at her, searching for the woman who used to fetch his coffee and manage his calendar. She wasn't there. "But I loved you," he whispered, a pathetic attempt at manipulation. Sarah laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "You loved owning me, Daniel. There's a difference. And now you don't own anything." A black SUV pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and Ethan stepped out. He looked at Daniel, then at Sarah. He didn't say a word to Daniel. He didn't acknowledge his existence. He just held out his hand to his wife. "Ready, my love. Ready," Sarah said. She took Ethan's hand and stepped into the car, turning her back on Daniel for the last time. As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of traffic, Daniel was left standing in the exhaust fumes, clutching his broom. A cold wind blew off Lake Michigan, cutting through his thin uniform. He watched the taillights disappear. He realized then that the true punishment wasn't the prison cell. It was this. Being free and realizing that the world had moved on without him leaving him behind, like dust in the wind. He looked down at the sidewalk, sighed, and kept sweeping. Sometimes the universe serves justice in ways we can't even imagine. Sarah didn't just survive. She transcended. She showed us that the best revenge isn't hatred. It's absolute indifference. Daniel ended up exactly where his choices led him alone, sweeping up the dirt while Sarah built a kingdom on the high ground. I want to know what you think. Was Sarah too harsh in that final scene, or did Daniel get exactly what he deserved? I read every comment, so let me know your thoughts below if this story gave you chills. Please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next drama. Until next time, stay strong and keep writing your own story.